What's up everybody, NFX here with another tutorial. This tutorial I'm going to call it musical phrases. And it's basically kind of a combination of things. It's a combination of some of the bassline tutorial, some of the melody tutorial, and then we're going to touch on a few things that requires you to have some knowledge of things like notes, which I've done a tutorial on, scales, which I've done a tutorial on, and chord progressions and chords, both of which I've done tutorials on. So if you haven't seen the notes, the scale, the chords, or the chord progression tutorials, you may want to go watch those first, or at least go watch those afterwards if there's some holes in the knowledge, in your knowledge when you hear me talking about something. If you're a little confused or you just want to learn more about that, go watch those, because I think if you understand those concepts first and then watch this this tutorial, you're going to get the most out of this tutorial. So hopefully you'll do that, or you have done that already. And when we're dealing with musical phrases, obviously the goal is to make something that sounds appealing to the ear. And one of the easiest ways of doing that is to make sure that the notes you're playing are within the scale that you've chosen to use for your song. And of course, part of your song may also include a chord progression, which is made up of notes within the scale that you've chosen also. So to kind of demonstrate what we mean by that concept before we get into the actual making up the musical phrase, let's talk about what our chord progression and our scale and everything is going to encompass. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to build, actually I've built it already, but we're going to build an accompaniment for our tutorial, for our demo here, and we're going to use the C major scale. The C major scale is very easy to use when demonstrating, and you'll probably see it used a lot in other tutorials because it's the simplest one to play and understand, because it basically, if you're looking at a piano keyboard, it starts on a C and it uses all the notes up to the next C or down to the prior C. In other words, it uses all the white notes as opposed to the black keys. I should say all the white keys as opposed to the black keys, because there are really no white or black notes. But anyway, so the scale is basically something along the lines of, okay, and that last C actually doesn't show up on the display there, but that's all right. So within those white keys, we're going to make some chords that will go from one chord to the next, and we're going to build those chords off certain notes. Now our root note of the scale is C. So we generally want to start our chord on that C, okay? And we're going to do a C major chord, which looks like this. Okay? And it's a C, the E, and the G. Our next chord is going to be the F major chord, which is going to be like this. And I'm playing that particular chord inverted, and I've got a tutorial on inverted chords also, so if you need more information about what that means, please go watch that tutorial. Our next chord is going to be the G major chord, and that's also going to be played inverted. And then we're going to play the F major again. So without me interrupting between the notes, this is the basic flow. And we'll repeat it. Okay, so now the accompaniment I've made is actually using some of the things that we're going to talk about. But what I've done is I've taken a string part, or a string instrument rather. Let me just shrink this down so we can get more of it in the view. And you can see it's basically playing the root note of the various chords we just talked about. C, F, G, F, and then it repeats C, F, G, F. Okay? If we play just that pattern on its own, you'll see it has a certain feel to it. And of course it repeats. Okay? Now, that's going to be like acting as our bass. If you notice, it's a lower frequency instrument, And so that's going to be kind of like our bass part. And then along with that, we're going to have this part accompanying us. And this part here, I'll also just shrink it a little bit. It also repeats, so we only really need to focus in on this half. But this part is it looks a lot more complex, but it's really not. What we're dealing with is a different sound, of course. Okay, it's some kind of electric piano or synthy type sound. But basically what we're doing, and to break this part down, is we're using the lower part, which was played with the left hand, and it's very simple. It follows along the same notes, only kind of in a double time to what we saw previously. It's going C, C, F, F, G, G, F, F. But then above that, remember the chords I showed you, those are getting played also. So we have, for example, here are the C major. Here is the F major inverted. Here's the G major inverted. And then here's the F major inverted again. Okay, so you can see they're kind of playing with each other. I'm playing the low note, then the chord, then the low note, then the chord, then the low note, then the chord, kind of bouncing off each other. And that gives us the following. So you can hear it sounds probably familiar to you. There's so many songs that use this chord progression. It's kind of a happier sound, maybe even a little corny, but who cares? You know, this is all about learning the basic idea or guidelines for writing these phrases that will fit into that. So we understand at this point, you should understand what we're talking about with regards to what notes we need to be using, the ones in the C major scale, what chords we're playing, again, built off the C major scale, but what chords are they specifically? C major, F major, G major, and F major. So this is kind of like the building block of what we're doing. Then I've added just a simple little drum line in there to, just to help me keep the time and everything. And then altogether our accompaniment is going to sound like this. Okay, so already we've used various principles of music theory in almost a scientific fashion, because they're rules or guidelines, right? So we've understood them, we've used them, and we've come up with an accompaniment that sounds pretty good. And now what we're going to talk about is how are you going to then take your basic progression or whatever you have, because this might be a little bit complex. You might just have some basic chord progressions down, or maybe just like the string line that we saw earlier. And how are you going to add to that? How do you know what to do to add to that? So that's what this is all going to be about in the end. So let's move on. And I'm going to bring up an instrument here, and it's going to be a little bit louder than the other instrumentation, because I want to make sure that you guys can hear it okay. Okay, so now I've adjusted the octave on my MIDI keyboard a little bit just so it fits into the view a little better. Okay, so now what we're going to talk about is how do we create the actual phrase that we want to come up with, okay? And what we're going to do is we're going to understand that within the C major scale, it's not called C major for nothing. The C means your C is your root note, which happens to be like your important note, your most important note. It's so important that generally you're going to start on that note and you want to end on that note, okay? But let's just talk about the C. Now I'm going to play the accompaniment, and then I'm just going to play one of the C notes, just a C note. But I'm going to try to play it in a pattern that you'll kind of hear, and then, but you'll notice that it's going to sound in tune with the song. It's just the one note, okay? Let's check that out. Okay, now my playing is not the best. I'm going to get that out front right now. I'm not a performer, okay? But you can hear that when I played the notes, they were in tune, okay? And then I tried to play them in a kind of a repeating pattern so that the next time around you kind of could anticipate what I was going to do, which gives you a sense of understanding the piece, okay? So that's another important thing. But now what we're going to do is we're going to take that single note and we're going to add to it a little bit. But let's talk about what are the other important notes that we need to play. Well, C is your most important note. But your other somewhat important notes are what are called the 4 and the 5 of the scale. In this case, the 4 is the F and the 5 is the G. And they're called 4 and 5 because if we start counting up the octave from C being 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Okay? And they coincidentally fall kind of in the middle between this C and that C. So they're also the farthest you can travel away from a C note, the F and the G, okay, in either direction. So if you were traveling from this C, G would be like the farthest you could go. If you were traveling from this C down, F would be the farthest you could go. Okay, so they're kind of sharing that spotlight in the middle between the two octaves. Okay, but they're important, and they're important because our progression uses those, obviously, and they use they sound like they have the most what we call tension. Tension, all it really means is it feels like something needs to happen after that. Okay, so if you're making a little melody and you go, it feels like something more needs to happen. See, we're on the G. We hit the G as our last note, but it didn't feel completed yet, right? It felt like there was a lot of tension there. Now, the further away you go from the C, the more tension there is until you start going back closer to the next C. That's why I was pointing out how they're kind of in the middle. But that's tension, okay? Now, tension, what does tension want to do? Tension wants to be fulfilled or resolved. So if you were just to play this melody, now, obviously, you probably were going, finish it already, right? Because it feels unfinished. But let's finish it by coming back down to C. So you can see now it sounds completed and it sounds like, okay. Thank you. You've brought me back home. As I said in the melody tutorial, it's like you're traveling away from home. You stop somewhere and then you come back, right? And that's exactly it. But we've got our two important notes, the F and the G. And then we've got the C. But wait, what are those two notes in between? Those are kind of what I call, this may or may not be the proper technical term, but I call them passing notes or traveling notes, because to me, it's as if when I want to get from C to G or C to F, I don't just go there. I mean, that has a certain feeling to it, yeah. But for like a melody, for example, I wouldn't just jump around like that throughout the whole thing. I'd want to travel there. I'd want to get there in smaller steps. And the way you do that is by going through these passing notes here. Okay? And then when you're traveling, of course, sometimes you're going to make jumps in your journey, like, right? But sometimes you want to get there slower, and you want to travel by taking less steps between your notes. So you'll want to go like, see, in that case, the most I traveled was to the neighbor note, either up or down. That's it. And you could probably, maybe you could tell that sounded a little bit more complicated. And even though all I did was basically kind of walk up and down, it sounded a lot more rich than just something like that, right? They all have their place. All these types of methods have their place. But for musical phrases, you know, the less you travel, the more complex it sounds. And to me, anyway, the more fulfilling it sounds, the more interesting it sounds. So anyway, so we've got our root note. We've got our passing notes. We've got our other important notes. Now, if we continue, we've got our root note back up here. And we have our two important notes, F and G. And you notice there's a couple notes in between there on the higher end of the spectrum of the octave there. And those are also kind of like passing notes. Now, the thing about passing notes is they often lead you back to the root note in a very fulfilling way. So if you just went, see, I jumped from the G back down to the C, didn't really sound that satisfying. But if you go from one of the passing notes back to the C, it sounds a little more fulfilling. Okay, so remember those passing notes are also important, but for a different reason, because they get us to and from our tension notes. And they can also be used to generate some tension, but the tension's not as strong as our two tension notes. Okay, so now let's go ahead and just to demonstrate, I'm going to play again just a C, and then I'm going to add one of these passing notes and come back to the C. I'm not even going to use our tension notes yet. Okay, and let's just hear what that might sound like. Okay, so I've only used those two passing notes to bring me back to the C, and it sounded okay. Now we're going to throw in our tension notes, and we're going to hold those guys. Okay, we're going to hold those a little bit longer to give us a feeling of incompleteness, so that we can come back to our C and then finish the job and feel like, you know, we were taking on a little journey. Okay, so let's just jump right in. Again, my timing was a little off there, but I think you understand what I'm talking about. I hope you understand what I'm talking about. So we use those notes to our advantage, but we have to understand what we're trying to do. So half the phrase we go up and land somewhere outside of our zone, up in there, and then we come back home. Okay, and generally that's how most musical phrases go. Now, it could be 1 bar, 2 bars, 4 bars, whatever. But you're going to want to basically make sure that you resolve it at some point. Okay, so there's only so much you can go away without coming back and just feeling like the job is finished. Also remember to put some repetition in it. The repetition is so that when your listener is hearing your music, they hear it the first time. The very first time they hear your little phrase, it doesn't register that they know it. In other words, their brain is going, I don't know this. Let me listen. Let me hear what this is about, right? The second time, their brain tells them, oh, wait, I recognize this. I recognize it. So the third time, their brain is going, I understand this. I know this now. And then the fourth time, it's expecting it. So the brain kind of goes through this process where, you build up this thing in the listener. Now, if you never played the same repetition pattern, or you didn't repeat some part of this thing, whether it's the timing of the rhythm and the notes or whatever, it would sound like just a long solo. And it might sound good for a while, but it's not going to sound good for a long time, because the listener's brain needs to feel it, understand it, anticipate it, and all these other things, which is what I like to think of as getting into the groove of it, which is kind of a simple way of saying it, but basically that's what it is. They hear it, they understand it, they can now appreciate it and enjoy it, okay? And that's really what all the parts that you need to do to write your own musical phrases. Of course, you're going to tailor these phrases differently depending on the instrument. Bass lines are going to be played in a lower key. Maybe they're going to be played in a different pattern. You'll repeat it, but it'll be in a different pattern than let's say, a string line or a flute or something at a higher octave, okay? You play a piano part, might be played in the middle octaves, and you might play the chords with some simple little fills here and there. Who knows? But the thing is like with a bass, you're not going to play chords, okay? You're going to play single notes, and you might slide notes, and you might bend notes or whatever, which you're not going to do so much with a piano. Pianos aren't really known to have slides and bends. Yes, you could do them with digital audio workstations like FL Studio or whatever, because it's possible to take a piano and bend the note, but it doesn't sound natural. So you got to understand that also as you progress in your musical knowledge. Understand what instruments how they're used and how they're put together. Trumpets are used a lot to accentuate the end of phrases, or to punctuate the beginning of a phrase or something, with a horn stabs or something like that. So as you listen to music, start listening to how they're using these various parts. But for musical phrases, just remember, stay within your scale, okay? Number one. Number two, determine what your important notes are. Your root note's always important. Notes within your progression, your other root chords, root chord notes are important. And the farther you are from your root, the more tension you're going to have. Remember to come back to the root at some point to fulfill that mission. And then offer up some kind of repetition, timing and or note-wise, so that the listener can hear it, connect with it, and then appreciate it, anticipate it, and hopefully start humming it and go, oh, that's really good, right? And that's all there is to it. This is really like, probably I should have called this music theory in a nutshell, or how to write a song in a nutshell, because when it boils down to it, if you can follow these steps for any instrument, not counting drums or percussion, you could pretty much make something that sounds good. Now, it may not be a hit, who knows, but it's going to sound all right, that's for sure. So if you follow these guidelines. Now, any guideline I tell you in any tutorial anywhere doesn't mean you have to always follow it. Some of the best songs come when rules or guidelines are broken, because we are also familiar with these things that at some point when you hear something unique or unexpected, that also gives the listener some form of a pleasure, like, wow, I wasn't expecting that, but that sounded really good, So experiment, don't try to stick to these, but at least understand what I've tried to tell you guys today. And I hope you can take it and run with it and do a lot of great things. And this is NFX. Let me tell you before I leave just about Warbeats.com. If you already know about it, stop the video. If you don't already know about it, just listen for the next minute, because what Warbeats has for you is quite a bit. It's free. It has over 2,000 maybe even up to 2,500 now, files for you to have access to. These are project files, FL Studio project files, FL Studio project remakes of, of commercial songs. We have some VSTs. We have some many drum kits and sample kits. We have, that's just our file section. Okay. We have an audio video chat room, meaning if you have a webcam and a microphone, you can get in there. You could talk to people. You could see them on the camera. You can show your own face on the camera. You can play your music straight to the chat room and get instant feedback that way if you want. Monday nights, they generally have live beat battles in there. So if you want to just go and spectate and see what that's about, feel free to do that. We have a forum. We have a bunch of sub-forums in there for music production, general chit-chat, whatever. It's all in there. You can talk to people. You can set up collabs. You can ask questions. You can answer questions. Even if you're already an expert, we want you there. If you're a newbie, we want you there. We just want people of all kinds to be there. We have for you articles. Tons of articles with up-and-coming producers, maybe some that are getting even more established these days. We have one of our oldest articles up there is with MDL, which maybe many of you know of from his YouTube tutorials, and the fact that he's worked with artists like Justin Bieber and some other people that have big careers now, right? So he's doing his thing. A bunch of other guys, that worked with, in the Bay, from the Bay Area to, Southern Cali to New York to Massachusetts, wherever. We've got a bunch of interviews. We have a bunch of other articles, how much to charge for beats, kind of maybe the business of it, copywriting your beats, all kinds of information like that. We have free beat feedback. So you can actually upload your beat and people will listen to it. And they'll evaluate it, and they'll tell you, they'll grade you on 4 specific areas, and they'll give you some comments on what they thought was good and bad about your beat. So you can actually go there, share your beat, listen to what the feedback says, and use that information to improve your beat making, along with all the other resources there. We have, of course, all the videos there that we have from YouTube. We have there some other videos from YouTube are on there. It's just overall, it's filled with information for you guys, and it's free. Okay. So please, if you haven't come by, tell a friend, warbeats.com. Also, don't forget to watch the rest of our tutorials if you haven't seen them out on YouTube, youtube.com/warbeats. And, just have a good time there. The purpose of Warbeats, for those of you who don't know, is a place for people to connect with each other and work with each other and learn from each other and help each other. That's it. I'm not trying to be a guru to anybody. I'm not trying to be a teacher or a mentor. Now, if I can teach you something, I'll do that because that's just how I am, and that's what I like to do. But beyond that, that's not what my job at Warbeats is. My job is to provide you with a place to do all of that. And that's what I do best, and that's what I like to do as well. So warbeats.com, youtube.com/warbeats. Come by, check it out, have a good time. And this is NFX saying, I'll see you guys in the next tutorial.